My name's Sherry Wentworth and I'm an anatomist on the Bundoora campus. In this clip we're going to look at tissues, specifically epithelial tissues. But before we do that, I want you to think back to HBA. In HBA you looked at tissue types. So what are the 4 basic tissue types you considered? What do you know about them? What can you remember? So from HBA and from your general knowledge, have a think and see if you can come up with a list of the 4 basic tissue types in the body. And why do we have those 4 types? What's their function? Why are they there? And don't spend a lot of time on it. Keep the answer simple. One word would actually cover the function of each of these tissue types. So stop the clip for a minute and think about the questions. We'll come back and answer them in a minute. So, basic tissue types. I said there were 4. We need to consider the idea of what they are and what their function is. Obviously, epithelial tissue is one of them. I've given you the name already. Connective tissue is the next one. Basic tissues of the body we need to consider as muscular tissue, and then the last one as nervous tissue. So what are they there for? As I said, keeping the answer simple, the function of epithelial tissue is that it covers, either externally or internally. It's a covering tissue. Connective tissue does what it says. It connects and supports other structures. Muscular tissue makes the muscles, and obviously movement is their function. Nervous tissue is the controlling tissue sending information around the body. Muscular tissue and nervous tissue we'll deal with in 2 separate inquiries. So inquiry 1 will deal with the musculoskeletal system. Inquiry 2 will deal with the nervous system. So I'm not talking about those tissues particularly at the moment. In this clip I'm dealing with epithelial tissue, and there'll be another one talking about connective tissue. So epithelial tissue, what is it? It covers a body's surface, so the outside of the body, or lines a cavity, so a covering tissue. It lines passages that communicate with the outside world, and it covers walls and organs in the ventral body cavities. Again, you met the idea of dorsal and ventral cavities last semester. So it's a reminder, if you don't remember last semester's work and we mention it this semester, go back and review it. We do expect you to know HBA material. Epithelial tissue has specific characteristics that make it epithelial. It has cells that have specialized contacts between each other. So epithelial tissue is firm and holds together well. It has a surface that is open to the outside or the internal environment. So it's one free surface. It is supported and held to other areas by connective tissue. So we have an epithelial layer and a connective tissue layer underneath it. Epithelial tissue has a good nerve supply. You scratch your skin and you know about it. But it actually doesn't have vessels running in that tissue. The blood supply is running beneath the epithelial tissue. Yes, I scratch the skin and it'll bleed, but the blood is coming from below, not actually in the tissue itself. So we refer to this as avascular. The nerve supply we refer to as the tissue being innervated. And epithelial tissue, as you do know, if you scratch yourself, it recovers. So epithelial tissue can regenerate. If you look at simple diagrams, and all the diagrams in this presentation are taken from your text, Mariam and Hone, we can show you the naming of the epithelial tissues. They are basically organised in the type of cell that's present, and we can look at the idea of a flat cell being a squamous cell, a cube-shaped cell, a cuboidal cell, and a cell that's elongated, so columnar. We can then look at how these cells are arranged. They can be arranged in one single layer, so that we'll refer to as a simple layer, and that then sits on the basement membrane on the connective tissue layer. Or we can layer these up, so we can have many layers of epithelial cells, and that is referred to as stratified. So let's find, if I have one layer, simple, and I have a flat cell, it'll be a simple squamous layer. And you'll find these layers where we want to transfer substances across the layer. So oxygen, for example, they're found in the alveoli of the lungs. Serous membranes of the body cavities will be simple squamous, as will be the lining of the heart and the blood vessels. If I add layers of flat cells, I'll get a stratified squamous layer. And this is the characteristic of the outside of the body, so the epithelial layer on the outside of the skin. It's also characteristic of the esophagus and the trachea. Anywhere that if I hit my body, rub it, it doesn't matter if I lose a few layers up the top. I have multiple layers running down, so it's stratified. I can lose the top layers and I get down to the bottom and it's still there. So it's an area where we expect some damage to occur, stratified squamous. Now what I'm going to do is show you this on a model of the skin. I'll also mention some of the tissues we'll be coming back to later. Right, in this model of the skin, the top layer up here is the epidermis. Right up the top here we have that simple stratified squamous epidermis, so the flat cells making the top layer. Down the bottom we'll have the regenerative layer of the epidermis. If we look further down into the skin, we can go through the various tissue types and we'll eventually come down to this yellow fatty layer. In the next clip we'll be looking at connective tissue and talking about adipose tissue or fatty tissue in the hypodermis, the layer below the epidermis. Having had a look at the model, we now need to consider the other simple layers. So simple cuboidal. Instead of the squamous cells, I now have the cube-shaped cell. So simple cuboidal I'll find in the kidney tubules that you learnt about last semester, and in the ducts and the secretory sections of small glands, because these cells will be secretory cells. The last layer we're looking at is simple columnar, found particularly in the digestive system, in the bronchi and in the uterine tubes. Now in some places their particular function is for secretion, in others to move substances along, so they'll be ciliated, they'll have little hair-like projections on the end of the cell. So this is the idea of the epithelial tissues. We'll next, in the next clip, go into the connective tissues.